Manchester United exited the Champions League on Tuesday night to the sound of smirking glee. Across the two legs, Sevilla deserved to advance, playing with great energy and goal home and away, but that's hardly the story. Once the quick, cursory round of applause was done, it was on to the serious business of mocking Jose Mourinho. Of course, schadenfreude has always had a place. There was once a time when English teams competing in Europe carried the nation's well-wishes, but that seems like an eternity ago. Currently, every round of group fixtures in the Champions League features 4 English sides. With that level of involvement, it's no wonder that the old sense of representation has been lost. These teams aren't standard-bearers anymore, they're pursuing their own ambitions, and consequently, their country of origin seems little more than a bureaucratic technicality. December 1995 is relevant here, too. The abolition of the foreign player rule, which limited managers to picking 3 players from outside the domestic country, meant, in conjunction with the Premier League's growing wealth and appeal, that British teams were loosening the ties with the country. Whereas the successful sides of the 1960s and 1970s had corralled the neutrals with us versus them. Nationalism, their contemporary equivalents, would represent little more than the depth of English football's resources. The effect of the Premier League's inception isn't quite as neat as now claimed. The existence of a thick before and after line drawn between May and August 1992 is a fallacy, and, in fact, it took several years before a discernible evolution noticeably began. BSKB brought plenty of cosmetic changes from the start, but the standard style of play took years to catch up. Meaning, of course, that some of that collective spirit survived into the 1990s. As a child growing up in a household without Sky Sports, I would latch on to whichever English side was participating in that year's tournament, and appeared on terrestrial television. Leeds back when the tournament was a straight knockout, Manchester United at the beginning of the group stage era, and Blackburn in 1995-96. For that time, one game stands above the others, Manchester United's trashing of FC Porto in March 1997. United didn't take to European football particularly well during that decade. Knocked out in the second round by Galatasaray on away goals in 93-94 and failing to emerge from a group with Galatasaray again, Barcelona and IFK Gothenburg in 94-95, they were still climbing the learning curve in 1996-97. The performances were typically strange and quite unlike anything they produced domestically. Eric Cantona would suffer ineffective evenings with his back to goal, his confident swagger giving way to palpable irritation, and United as a team often failed to reach the gears they did at home. On reflection, it was an ailment which every British team seemed to share. The accepted wisdom of the time was that, to succeed in Europe, those sides needed to abandon the native style. What they were supposed to adapt to was never properly explained, but they had to be different. The boom and bust of the Premier League was something to be ashamed of and a weakness which had to be hidden. In the 1995-96 season, Blackburn Rovers had finished bottom of a Champions League group containing Spartak Moscow, Legia Warsaw and Rosenborg. They were already defending Premier League champions in name only by the point, mounting a non-existent defence of the title, but 4 points from a possible 18 conveys just how limp the participation was. In those formative European years, Alex Ferguson's United were also regularly caught betwixt and between. Advancing to face Porto in that 1997 quarter-final may have represented progress, but it had still been an unconvincing struggle. They lost home and away to Juventus, won both games with Rapid Vienna and also away to Fenerbahce, but conspired to lose to an Elverbolic deflection at Old Trafford. They qualified, but had to rely on a second-string Juventus beating the Turkish side on the final match day. Porto, United's quarter-final opponents, were a caricature of an Iberian team. The manager, Antonio Luis Oliveira Ribeiro, looked every inch the cliché with his elaborate moustache, and the squad was a who's who of championship manager excellence: Dralovic, Jardel, Zahovic, Sergio Conceição. But United were brilliant, wonderful. It was one of those nights at Old Trafford where the life within the stadium seemed to pound through the television screen. An early goal from David May, which still looks like a physical impossibility to this day, was followed by a fierce drive from Cantona, a dazzling move between Andy Cole and Brian Giggs ended with the winger thrashing the ball under Ilario for the third, and, finally, a feathered chip by Cole floated into the bottom corner to add an elegant fourth. The Premier League's financial primacy has altered European football, and the way it's viewed by the British public. Champions League quarter-finals are no longer much of a big deal than Porto, or any other side. From beyond La Liga, the Bundesliga and Serie A are not to be fretted over. But then, though it was truly an occasion, listen to the gravity within Brian Moore's commentary and hear the fevered reaction of the Old Trafford crowd. This was a big deal. Maybe we were all younger and more naive then, and maybe Manchester United should have won that game 4-0. But it didn't feel like that. At the time, it was a shot fired across the continent. Most importantly, it was United being United. That game showed them at the technical best, but also in a way which was recognizable from Match of the Day. Cantona looked and played like Cantona, Giggs like Giggs. They performed with that familiar strut. They, and by proxy, we, belonged. Even typing that now seems faintly ridiculous, but it was important. Elsewhere in Europe that season, Arsenal had lost to Borussia Mönchengladbach in the first round of the UEFA Cup. Aston Villa had been eliminated by Helsingborgs at the same stage. And Newcastle progressed to the quarter-finals only to be humbled by a Monaco team which included Ali Benabia, John Collins, a young Thierry Henry and Fabien Barthez. The signs of English inferiority were everywhere, and they were reinforced every season. Arsenal may have won the Cup Winners' Cup just 3 years before, with an Alan Smith goal enough to see of Parma, but that was an exception. And after all, the more recent memory was Nam's opportunist punt in 1995, and, again, an English team being the butt of a joke we didn't get. No, beating Porto 4-0, the second leg finished goalless, didn't change anything. Not even for United themselves, who were eliminated by eventual winners Borussia Dortmund in the semi-final, but it offered a suggestion of improvement. An argument against the notion that British teams, in the jackboots, jeans and t-shirts, were no match for the continental glitterati. That they weren't smart enough, that they weren't pretty enough. Truth be told, they still regularly weren't, but this offered the suggestion that they one day might be. Today, the last thing English football could be accused of is having an inferiority complex. Rivalry and base tribalism instructs the cackling at other Premier League teams' misfortune, but also a great deal of entitlement. There's so much money in this country, that nobody need fear its place in the footballing hierarchy. But not so in 1997, when United provided a jolt of self-esteem strong enough to be shared around.